Have you ever wondered how one person's courage can spark a movement that changes the world? Today, we delve into the extraordinary story of Elijah Carter, a black guardian of the Capitol, whose unwavering dignity in the face of a racist attack inspired a global reckoning with justice, compassion, and unity. Through his journey, we'll uncover lessons about grace under pressure, the power of community, and the strength of love and empathy in overcoming darkness. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below with an inspiring phrase about justice. Something like, "I choose empathy and understanding to guide my actions today and every day." Let's spread the light of hope together. Let's begin with the story of a man who stood unyielding against hate, turning an act of violence into a rallying cry for a better tomorrow. Elijah Carter had always been a symbol of strength and poise. As a Capitol guardian, his presence alone carried a quiet authority, a mix of discipline and integrity that earned him respect across the board. Every morning, he donned his uniform, a badge of his commitment to protect and serve, knowing that his mere existence as a black man in such a visible role challenged deeply ingrained societal prejudices. The Capitol grounds, sprawling with pristine marble columns and the hum of bustling tourists, were a place of both history and hope. Elijah walked those grounds daily, offering guidance to visitors, standing as a silent sentinel of democracy. It was on one of those ordinary days that the unthinkable happened. It began subtly. A middle-aged man, later identified as Robert Dean, loitered near the central fountain, his gaze fixed on Elijah with an intensity that felt unnerving. Elijah, seasoned in handling such situations, maintained his professional demeanor, offering a courteous nod. But as Dean approached, the malice in his expression became unmistakable. "Elijah Carter, isn't it?" Dean spat, his voice tinged with disdain. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than us?" The words stung, not because they were new, but because they carried the weight of centuries of prejudice. Elijah didn't flinch. Instead, he met Dean's gaze, his calm voice a sharp contrast to the escalating vitriol. "Sir, if you have a question or need assistance, I'm here to help." Dean's response came not in words, but in a shocking act of aggression. He spat on Elijah, the vile act reverberating like a thunderclap through the gathered crowd. Gasps rippled through the onlookers, some raising their smartphones to record the incident, while others stood frozen in disbelief. Elijah's reaction was a masterclass in composure. He didn't retaliate, didn't shout or lash out. Instead, he took a step back, his posture a blend of dignity and restraint. The humiliation was palpable, but Elijah's unyielding valor shone brighter. "This behavior," he said, his voice steady, "is a reflection of your choices, not mine." The crowd murmured, and a few even stepped forward, offering support to Elijah. But it was clear that this moment wasn't just about one man. It was about the larger, festering issue of racism that had plagued societies for generations. As the day progressed, the video of the incident began circulating online. By nightfall, it had gone viral. The footage, stark and raw, showcased not only the vile act, but Elijah's remarkable grace in response. Social media exploded with discussions. Hashtags like #JusticeForElijah and #StandWithDignity trending worldwide. In living rooms, offices, and coffee shops, people debated the implications of the incident. For some, it was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the racial prejudice that continued to simmer beneath society's surface. For others, it became a rallying cry to address the systemic issues that allowed such acts to persist. But for Elijah, the virality of the video was a double-edged sword. While it brought overwhelming support and admiration, it also thrust him into the spotlight in a way he hadn't anticipated. Strangers approached him with tearful gratitude, sharing stories of their own struggles with racism. Media outlets bombarded him with interview requests, eager to capture his perspective. Yet, amidst the chaos, Elijah remained steadfast. He knew that the incident wasn't about him as an individual, but about the larger fight for justice and equality. And so, when asked why he didn't retaliate, his answer was simple yet profound. Hatred only breeds more hatred. Someone has to break the cycle. The Capitol authorities conducted a swift investigation, and Robert Dean was charged with harassment and hate crimes. His act, intended to humiliate and demean, had inadvertently shone a spotlight on the very issues he sought to perpetuate. Dean's subsequent arrest added fuel to the fire, sparking protests and rallies across the nation. In those gatherings, people of all races and backgrounds came together, holding signs that read, "Dignity over hate," and "Break the cycle." Elijah attended a few of these events, his quiet presence galvanizing the crowd. He spoke sparingly but powerfully, emphasizing the need for compassion and understanding in addressing prejudice. "What happened to me is just one story in a sea of countless others," he told the crowd in Washington Square. "But what we do with this moment, that's what will define us. Will we let hate dictate our actions, or will we choose empathy and justice?" As the weeks passed, Elijah's story continued to resonate. Schools incorporated discussions about the incident into their curriculums, using it as a case study to teach students about empathy and moral courage. Community leaders organized forums to address racial tensions, citing Elijah's composure as an example of how to approach conflict with integrity. Even global leaders weighed in, with some using the incident to highlight the universal struggle against discrimination. The Pope himself mentioned Elijah during a sermon, praising his grace and calling for humanity to embrace the virtues of love and forgiveness. Yet, despite the widespread impact, Elijah remained grounded. He continued his duties as a Capitol guardian, though his routine was now punctuated by moments of reflection. He knew the battle against racism wasn't won in a day or even a lifetime, but he also understood that each step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. And so, as Elijah stood once again on the Capitol grounds, his uniform pressed and his head held high, he reminded himself of a simple truth: change begins with the courage to confront hate with love. The ripple effects of Elijah's story were just beginning to unfold. But as his message of compassion spread, the man who had sparked it all, Robert Dean, took shocking actions that would escalate the situation to a dangerous new level. What did Dean do? And how would Elijah rise to meet the challenge? Stay tuned as we explore the breaking point that would test Elijah's resolve like never before. The aftermath of the initial confrontation brought a wave of emotions to Elijah Carter's life. The support from strangers was overwhelming, but so was the backlash from those who refused to see the truth in his actions. Among the critics was Robert Dean himself, who, after being released on bail, embarked on a disturbing campaign to shift the narrative in his favor. Instead of expressing remorse for his actions, Dean doubled down, appearing on television interviews and online forums, painting himself as the victim of an overly sensitive society. His words were venomous, calculated to inflame those who shared his bigotry. "We're living in a world where you can't even express yourself without being labeled a monster," he claimed during a primetime broadcast. The interviewer pressed him, asking if he felt his actions, spitting on another human being, were justified. Dean shrugged, his face twisted in a smirk. "I acted out of frustration. People like him think they're untouchable. Someone had to put him in his place." The fallout was immediate. Dean's supporters rallied around him, creating a firestorm of hateful rhetoric online. Threats against Elijah and his family began pouring in, forcing Capitol authorities to assign additional security to ensure his safety. Yet Elijah refused to waver. "Fear is a tool of oppression," he told a close friend. "If I let it dictate my life, then the people who thrive on hate have already won." Still, the pressure was immense. The Capitol became a flashpoint for protests, with opposing groups gathering on its grounds almost daily. Elijah found himself at the center of this maelstrom, a living symbol of the divide that had split the nation. He continued his work with quiet determination, each step he took on the marble floors a testament to his resilience. But Robert Dean wasn't finished. His next move would escalate the situation to a dangerous and unprecedented level. It began with a series of cryptic posts on social media. Dean's followers circulated images of Elijah with inflammatory captions, accusing him of undermining American values and promoting a hidden agenda. The language was coded but sinister, dripping with implications that called for violence. Then came the threats, specific, detailed, and chilling in their precision. Law enforcement agencies intercepted messages hinting at plans to stage a violent act on Capitol grounds, with Elijah as the primary target. The situation reached a boiling point when a package arrived at the Capitol security office, addressed to Elijah. Inside was a handwritten note scrawled with hate-filled slurs and a chilling ultimatum. Step down, or there will be consequences. Attached to the note was a small device, a crude but functional explosive. The discovery sent shockwaves through the Capitol and beyond. Federal authorities launched an immediate investigation, linking the device to a known extremist group with which Dean had connections. The discovery of his ties to such groups added a new layer of urgency to the situation. Elijah was thrust into an even brighter spotlight, not as just a victim of hate, but now as a target of domestic terrorism. Through it all, Elijah remained composed. When asked by investigators if he wanted to step away for his own safety, his response was unwavering. "If I retreat, I abandon everything I stand for. This isn't just about me anymore." His words resonated, inspiring others to stand alongside him. Capitol staff organized solidarity events, and community members flooded his office with letters of support. The turning point came during a tense day when a major rally was scheduled. Intelligence suggested that Dean and his followers planned to infiltrate the event to create chaos. Elijah, ever the calm presence in the storm, volunteered to assist law enforcement in identifying potential threats. His first-hand knowledge of the Capitol grounds and his ability to remain composed under pressure proved invaluable. As the rally unfolded, tensions were high. Thousands gathered to show support for Elijah and to call for justice, their signs and chants a powerful reminder of the unity his story had inspired. But amidst the sea of peaceful protesters, a small group moved with sinister intent. Dean's plan was to ignite violence, hoping to turn the narrative against Elijah and his supporters. Elijah noticed the group almost immediately. Their movements were coordinated, their eyes scanning the crowd with unsettling focus. He discreetly alerted the officers nearby, guiding them to intercept the individuals before they could act. The operation was swift and effective, with several arrests made on the spot. Among those detained was Dean himself, caught red-handed with evidence linking him to the planned attack. The scene was chaotic, but Elijah's calm presence once again provided a stabilizing force. As the crowd began to realize what had transpired, a chant erupted. "Justice, not hate. Justice, not hate." The words echoed through the Capitol grounds, a testament to the resilience of those who refused to let hatred win. The arrests marked a turning point in the story. Dean's actions, now exposed to the public, left no room for misinterpretation. He wasn't a victim. He was a perpetrator of hatred, willing to endanger lives to further his agenda. The revelations prompted widespread condemnation, even from some who had initially supported him. Elijah, reflecting on the events, addressed the nation in a heartfelt statement. Standing before a bank of microphones, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, he said, "This isn't the end of hate, but it is a step toward justice. We've seen what darkness looks like, but we've also seen the power of light when we stand together. Let this be a reminder that love and courage are stronger than fear." His words resonated deeply, sparking a renewed sense of purpose among those fighting for equality and justice. But for Elijah, the journey was far from over. The attack had been averted, but the scars it left on him, on the Capitol, and on the nation would take time to heal. As the dust settled, investigators uncovered a web of connections between Dean and extremist groups, revealing the depth of the hatred he represented. But with each revelation came a question: how could a society so advanced still harbor such darkness? In the next chapter, we'll explore the unraveling of this network and the systemic issues it exposed, setting the stage for a movement that would redefine justice and unity. The aftermath of Robert Dean's arrest marked a pivotal moment in the unfolding saga, but it also unleashed a torrent of revelations that would ripple far beyond the Capitol. Investigators delving into Dean's background uncovered not only his personal prejudices, but also his deep ties to a sprawling network of extremist groups. These organizations thrived in the shadows, their ideologies woven into online forums, encrypted chat rooms, and even mainstream platforms masquerading as innocent debates about culture and identity. As the public learned more, the narrative shifted from a single man's act of hatred to a broader examination of the systems that allowed such extremism to fester. The revelations were sobering. Reports revealed that Dean had been a key figure in orchestrating campaigns designed to stoke division, manipulating fears to recruit individuals disillusioned with the modern world. What began as scattered acts of intolerance had coalesced into a structured and insidious movement, one that thrived on anonymity and the fractured trust of society. Yet amidst the darkness, Elijah Carter's story continued to shine as a beacon of hope. The footage of his composure during the initial confrontation, paired with his decisive role in preventing the Capitol attack, had struck a chord globally. Social media campaigns highlighted his courage, and news outlets around the world reported on his steadfastness. What made Elijah's story so powerful wasn't just his actions, but the values they represented: grace, dignity, and a refusal to succumb to hate. In classrooms from New York to Nairobi, teachers used Elijah's story to spark conversations about tolerance and empathy. Students, inspired by his strength, organized their own initiatives to combat bullying and prejudice in their communities. "If he can stand up to that kind of hatred," one student wrote in a letter to Elijah, "then I can stand up to the kids who make fun of me for being different." Elijah himself, though humbled by the global response, remained focused on the larger picture. He worked closely with advocacy groups and policymakers, using his newfound platform to push for systemic changes. One of the first victories came in the form of a bill addressing hate crimes, which passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. The legislation aimed to close loopholes that had previously allowed offenders to evade accountability, and it provided funding for educational programs designed to foster understanding among diverse communities. But the reach of Elijah's story extended beyond policy. It touched hearts in ways that statistics and laws never could. Letters poured into his office from people of all walks of life, some sharing their own experiences with discrimination, others offering heartfelt gratitude for his example. Among them was a letter from a former member of an extremist group who credited Elijah's story with prompting him to leave the organization. "Seeing your restraint and humanity made me question everything I believed," the letter read. "You reminded me that there's another way to live." Elijah's humility in the face of such impact was one of his defining traits. He often deflected attention from himself, redirecting it toward the community efforts that were beginning to flourish in the wake of his story. Across the nation, grassroots movements sprang up, each one inspired by the idea that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences. One particularly poignant example came from a small town in the Midwest, where residents organized a unity march in honor of Elijah. The event brought together people from different backgrounds who, despite living in the same community, had rarely interacted before. By the end of the march, new friendships had formed, and the local leaders pledged to hold regular town halls to address issues of inclusion and representation. Internationally, Elijah's story continued to resonate. In South Africa, a nation still grappling with the legacies of apartheid, activists drew parallels between Elijah's grace under fire and the principles championed by figures like Nelson Mandela. In Germany, Holocaust educators incorporated his story into their lessons on the dangers of hate and the power of resilience. And in Japan, a university symposium on global ethics invited Elijah to speak, where he shared his insights on navigating conflict with integrity. His speech at the symposium was a masterclass in wisdom and humility. Speaking in a calm yet commanding tone, he addressed the audience with a mix of personal anecdotes and universal truths. "We live in a world where fear is often louder than love," he began, his words carrying a quiet authority. "But fear thrives on ignorance, and ignorance can be dispelled through understanding. When we take the time to truly see each other, not as adversaries, but as fellow human beings, we find that love is the stronger force." The room erupted in applause, but Elijah's impact wasn't limited to his words. After the event, Students approached him, eager to learn more about how they could contribute to the fight against prejudice in their own communities. Elijah's responses were thoughtful, rooted in his belief that change began at the individual level. Start by listening, he advised. Sometimes the most radical act is simply to give someone the space to be heard. Back in the United States, the revelations about Dean's network prompted a deeper reckoning. Media coverage turned a spotlight on the role of technology in amplifying hate, leading to calls for greater accountability from social media companies. The pressure mounted, and several platforms implemented stricter policies to curb the spread of extremist content. While these measures weren't perfect, they signaled a shift in the broader cultural landscape, a recognition that combating hate required a collective effort. Through it all, Elijah remained a steady presence. He continued his work at the Capitol, his daily routine a quiet reminder that even in the face of extraordinary challenges, life goes on. But he also embraced his role as a catalyst for change, participating in events and initiatives that aligned with his values. As Elijah reflected on the journey so far, he often returned to a simple truth. Change, though difficult, was possible when people chose courage over complacency. He thought of the countless individuals who had reached out to him, students, activists, even former adversaries, and he marveled at the ripple effect of a single moment of grace. As Elijah's story reached new heights, the revelations about the extremist network took an even darker turn, exposing connections that threatened to destabilize more than just local communities. What secrets would come to light, and how would Elijah's growing influence shape the next chapter of this unfolding battle for justice? Stay tuned as the shadowy depths of hate are confronted with unwavering resolve. As the layers of Robert Dean's network began to unravel, the true depth of the hatred he represented became horrifyingly clear. Investigators pieced together a mosaic of connections that painted a chilling picture. Extremist groups spanning multiple states, sophisticated propaganda campaigns designed to radicalize vulnerable individuals, and even links to international organizations fueling division and discord. The revelations struck a nerve, igniting a firestorm of public outrage that rippled across the nation. The media became saturated with reports detailing the network's activities. News anchors described how the group used encrypted messaging apps to coordinate rallies and spread disinformation, while experts explained the psychological tactics employed to recruit new members. Each new detail sparked a fresh wave of condemnation, and the nation seemed to collectively grapple with the question, how had such hatred been allowed to thrive in plain sight? The response from the public was immediate and visceral. Peaceful protests erupted in cities and towns across the country, as people from all walks of life came together to demand action. Crowds carried signs emblazoned with messages like "Love over hate" and "Silence is complicity," their voices rising in unison to call for justice. Elijah Carter's name was often invoked as a symbol of the fight against bigotry, his courage inspiring countless individuals to stand up against prejudice in their own communities. But as the movement for justice gained momentum, it also faced fierce resistance. The same extremist networks that had been exposed doubled down on their efforts to intimidate and retaliate. Elijah became a primary target, receiving a flood of threats that tested his resolve. One particularly disturbing message read, "We may have lost the battle, but the war is far from over. You'll regret the day you stood against us." Despite the escalating danger, Elijah refused to back down. His unwavering composure in the face of adversity became a rallying point for those who believed in his message of resilience and compassion. "Fear is what they want," Elijah said during an interview with a prominent news outlet. "But fear has no place in the fight for justice. We must meet their hatred with courage and their threats with solidarity." Meanwhile, the investigation into Dean's activities uncovered a shocking revelation: plans for coordinated acts of violence aimed at destabilizing public trust and inciting chaos. Law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly to dismantle these plots, but the threat of further attacks loomed large. The tension reached a breaking point when Dean, now facing additional charges, made a bold and inflammatory statement from jail. In a recorded message leaked to the press, Dean taunted Elijah and his supporters, claiming that their movement was doomed to fail and that the forces opposing them were stronger than they could ever imagine. His words were calculated to sow doubt and fear, but instead, they had the opposite effect. Elijah's response was swift and powerful. Standing before a crowd of thousands at a rally in the heart of the capital, he addressed Dean's comments with the same grace and strength that had defined his journey. "Strength isn't measured by the ability to tear others down," he said, his voice steady and resonant. "True strength lies in the courage to build, to heal, and to stand together in the face of adversity. To those who think this movement can be silenced, know this: we are not backing down. Not now, not ever." The crowd erupted in cheers, their collective energy a testament to the growing power of the movement. The rally, broadcast live on multiple platforms, drew millions of viewers worldwide. Social media lit up with messages of support, and the hashtags #JusticeUnbroken and #ElijahCarterResilient began trending globally. As the public rallied behind Elijah, the government took decisive action. Lawmakers introduced sweeping reforms aimed at combating domestic extremism and promoting inclusivity. The legislation included measures to enhance oversight of online platforms, strengthen hate crime laws, and provide funding for education programs focused on tolerance and empathy. While the bills faced some opposition, the overwhelming public demand for change made it clear that the tide had turned. In the midst of these developments, Elijah found himself navigating a delicate balance. While his role as a public figure had grown exponentially, he remained deeply connected to the grassroots efforts that had emerged in response to his story. He attended community meetings, spoke at schools, and worked closely with organizations dedicated to fostering understanding and unity. One particularly moving moment came during a visit to a high school in the Midwest. A student approached Elijah after his speech, tears streaming down her face. "I used to feel so alone," she said, her voice trembling. "But your story gives me hope. It reminds me that I have a voice too." Elijah knelt to meet her gaze, his own eyes filled with emotion. "You have a voice," he said softly, "and it's powerful. Use it to make the world a better place." Meanwhile, the extremist groups targeted by the investigation began to splinter under the weight of public scrutiny and legal pressure. Some members, faced with the possibility of prosecution, chose to disavow their affiliations and cooperate with authorities. Others, however, dug in their heels, vowing to continue their fight from the shadows. For Elijah, the struggle against hate was far from over. He knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but he also believed deeply in the power of community and the resilience of the human spirit. "Every act of kindness, every moment of courage, it all adds up," he said during a televised interview. "We may not see the results overnight, but the seeds we plant today will grow into a better tomorrow." As the extremist network crumbled, deeper ties to influential figures and hidden agendas came to light, threatening to shake the very foundations of society. How would Elijah navigate the mounting complexities of a movement that had grown beyond anything he could have imagined? And what sacrifices would be required to ensure that justice prevailed? Stay with us as the story unfolds further, revealing the shadowy forces that still lurked in the background. The cracks in the extremist network were widening, yet with every breakthrough came a deeper, more insidious revelation. Investigators had begun to trace connections between Robert Dean's group and a series of high-profile figures, business leaders, media personalities, and even local politicians who had quietly funded and supported their activities. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a fringe movement, but a deeply entrenched ideology that reached into the very fabric of society. For Elijah Carter, these revelations marked a sobering turn. What had once been a singular act of hatred had blossomed into a fight against a pervasive system of prejudice and corruption. Still, Elijah held firm to his principles. He believed that exposing the truth and confronting these forces with transparency and unity was the only way to dismantle them. "Hate thrives in shadows," he often said. "Our greatest weapon is the light of truth." The investigation took a dramatic turn when law enforcement uncovered plans for a large-scale attack targeting multiple public institutions. Documents retrieved from encrypted servers revealed that a coordinated assault had been in the works for months, designed to sow chaos and destabilize public trust. The Capitol was a key target, a symbol of democracy that the group sought to tarnish with fear and violence. As these plans came to light, Elijah found himself thrust into a pivotal role once again. His intimate knowledge of the Capitol grounds, coupled with his calm demeanor and proven leadership, made him an invaluable asset to the task force working to prevent the attack. Elijah was no stranger to tension, but the gravity of this situation weighed heavily on him. Lives were at stake, and the pressure to act decisively was immense. The days leading up to the planned attack were a blur of strategy meetings, security drills, and intelligence briefings. Elijah worked closely with law enforcement officials, sharing insights and helping to identify potential vulnerabilities. Despite the intense atmosphere, he remained composed, his steady presence a source of reassurance for the team. The turning point came on a quiet evening when an informant, a disillusioned member of the extremist group, provided critical information about the attack's timing and methods. According to the informant, the group planned to infiltrate a peaceful rally scheduled at the Capitol, using the cover of the crowd to launch their assault. The informant's testimony was chilling in its detail, describing the weapons, tactics, and targets with unsettling precision. With this information in hand, the task force moved swiftly to thwart the attack. Additional security measures were implemented, and the rally's organizers were informed of the potential threat. Yet, there was a delicate balance to strike. The goal was to protect the public without causing widespread panic, which could play into the extremists' hands. On the day of the rally, the tension was palpable. Thousands of people had gathered on the Capitol grounds, their voices united in a call for justice and unity. Elijah stood among them, his presence both symbolic and strategic. He had volunteered to join the security team, his role carefully coordinated to ensure both visibility and preparedness. As the event unfolded, signs of the plot began to emerge. A group of individuals, dressed inconspicuously, moved with calculated intent through the crowd. Their movements were subtle but coordinated, their eyes scanning for weak points in the security perimeter. Elijah noticed them almost immediately, their demeanor a stark contrast to the peaceful energy of the rallygoers. With a discreet signal to the officers nearby, Elijah initiated a carefully planned operation to intercept the suspects. The response was swift and precise. Within moments, the individuals were surrounded and detained. Their attempts to resist met with a coordinated and professional effort. The crowd, largely unaware of the unfolding danger, continued their chants and speeches, their message of hope and resilience undisturbed. In the aftermath, law enforcement revealed the full scope of what had been averted. The detained individuals had been carrying weapons and explosives, their plans detailed in confiscated documents. The attack, had it succeeded, could have resulted in catastrophic loss of life and a devastating blow to public morale. Instead, thanks to the swift actions of Elijah and the task force, a tragedy had been prevented. News of the thwarted attack spread quickly, sparking both relief and outrage. The public celebrated the bravery and vigilance of those who had acted to protect them, but they also demanded answers. How had such a plot been allowed to develop? Who else was complicit in enabling these extremists? And what steps would be taken to ensure that similar threats were addressed in the future? Elijah, once again thrust into the spotlight, used his platform to address these questions with characteristic grace and conviction. In a televised statement, he spoke directly to the nation, his words a call to action as much as a message of reassurance. What we face today is a reminder of the challenges we still have to overcome, he said. But it's also a testament to the strength we find in each other when we stand united. Let this moment be a turning point, not just in confronting hatred, but in building a future where it has no place to take root. His speech resonated deeply, sparking a renewed wave of support for the movement he had come to symbolize. Community leaders organized forums to discuss strategies for addressing extremism, while lawmakers pushed for further reforms to counter the systemic issues that enabled such threats. At the same time, Elijah worked behind the scenes to support the individuals and organizations leading these efforts. his focus always on empowering others to take up the cause. Yet amidst the progress, Elijah remained acutely aware of the personal toll this journey had taken. The threats against him and his family persisted, a stark reminder of the risks involved in challenging deeply entrenched hatred. But for Elijah, the sacrifices were worth it. "Every step we take toward justice," he often said, "is a step worth taking, even when the path is hard." The thwarted attack marked a significant victory, but it also uncovered a deeper, more dangerous network with international ties. How far would these connections reach? And what new challenges would arise as the movement for justice confronted the shadows of global extremism? Stay with us as we delve into the revelations that would reshape the battle for unity and truth. The revelation of the thwarted attack had sparked a surge of determination across the nation. People were no longer content to passively observe the battle against hatred. They wanted to be part of the solution. Elijah Carter, now both a hero and a symbol of resilience, found himself at the forefront of a burgeoning grassroots movement. What had started as isolated acts of support began to coalesce into something far greater, a united demand for justice and reform. Rallies erupted in cities large and small, each one an expression of solidarity and a call for change. Crowds gathered under banners that read, "Justice for all" and "No place for hate," their voices rising in harmony as they chanted for equality. From the steps of the Capitol to rural town squares, the energy was electric, the momentum unstoppable. Elijah, ever humble, attended as many of these events as he could, using his presence to amplify the voices of those around him. One rally, held on the Capitol grounds, became a turning point in the movement. Tens of thousands of people gathered, their diversity a testament to the unity Elijah had inspired. The air buzzed with anticipation as speakers took the stage, sharing stories of resilience and hope. When Elijah finally stepped forward, the crowd erupted in cheers that echoed for blocks. He stood for a moment, taking in the sea of faces before him. Then, with a deep breath, he began to speak. "Today, we stand here not as individuals, but as a collective force for good," he said, his voice steady and strong. "We are proof that love and unity can triumph over hate. But this is only the beginning. The fight for justice doesn't end with rallies or speeches. It continues in our actions, our choices, and our commitment to one another." Elijah's words struck a chord, weaving through the crowd like a thread binding them together. He shared personal anecdotes, including the challenges he'd faced and the lessons he'd learned. He spoke of the people who had inspired him, the activists, teachers, and everyday individuals who had shown him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the resolve to act despite it. Among the crowd were families, students, and community leaders, all drawn by the magnetic power of Elijah's message. Many carried candles, their flickering flames a symbol of hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the scene transformed into a sea of light. The collective glow, a poignant reminder of the strength found in unity. Yet the rally wasn't just about words and symbolism. It was about action. Organizers used the event to launch initiatives aimed at addressing the root causes of extremism. Workshops were planned to educate communities on recognizing and countering hate speech, while mentorship programs were established to support at-risk youth. One particularly ambitious project involved creating safe spaces for open dialogue, where individuals from different backgrounds could share their experiences and find common ground. Elijah championed these efforts, working tirelessly to ensure their success. He met with educators to discuss how schools could incorporate lessons on empathy and inclusion into their curriculums. He collaborated with local officials to improve community policing and foster trust between law enforcement and marginalized groups. And he continued to lend his voice to the push for legislative reform, advocating for policies that would create a more equitable society. The impact of these efforts was tangible. In one city, a mentorship program helped a teenager named Marcus, who had been on the brink of joining an extremist group, find a new path. Guided by a mentor who had once faced similar struggles, Marcus discovered a passion for art and began using his talent to create murals that celebrated diversity. One of his pieces, depicting Elijah surrounded by people of all races and backgrounds, became a symbol of the movement, its image shared widely across social media. Stories like Marcus's fueled the momentum of the movement, inspiring others to take action in their own communities. Churches, synagogues, and mosques opened their doors to interfaith dialogues, while businesses pledged to support diversity initiatives. Even in areas where resistance to change had been strong, cracks began to form as more people recognized the need for unity. But the path forward wasn't without challenges. Opposition to the movement grew increasingly vocal, with detractors accusing Elijah and his supporters of being divisive or radical. Online platforms became battlegrounds where misinformation spread like wildfire, threatening to undermine the progress that had been made. Elijah, however, refused to be deterred. He understood that every movement faced resistance, and he remained steadfast in his belief that persistence and integrity would prevail. In one particularly heated interview, a journalist pressed Elijah on the criticism he'd received. "Some say your actions are polarizing, that they're creating more division than unity," the journalist said. Elijah's response was measured but firm. "Division doesn't come from confronting injustice," he replied. "It comes from ignoring it. If standing up for what's right creates discomfort, then that's a discomfort we must be willing to face. Change has never been easy, but it has always been necessary." His words resonated, echoing across news outlets and social media platforms. Supporters rallied to his defense, using the criticism as an opportunity to reinforce the movement's core message. Hashtags like #JusticeUnited and #StandWithElijah trended once again, their reach extending far beyond national borders. Internationally, Elijah's influence continued to grow. Leaders in Europe, Asia, and Africa invited him to speak at conferences and forums, eager to learn from his experience. In one memorable address at the United Nations, Elijah called for a global commitment to combating hate and fostering understanding. His speech, delivered with characteristic humility and passion, received a standing ovation and became a defining moment in his journey. As the movement expanded, Elijah took time to reflect on its significance. He often thought about the people who had supported him from the beginning, his family, his colleagues, and the countless strangers who had reached out with messages of encouragement. Their belief in him had given him the strength to persevere, and he was determined to honor their faith by continuing the fight for justice. While the rallies and initiatives marked significant progress, the revelations about the deeper roots of extremism were far from over. As investigators uncovered links to international organizations and systemic failures, Elijah would face his greatest challenge yet, confronting the institutional forces that allowed hatred to thrive. What sacrifices would be required to dismantle such a deeply entrenched system? Stay with us as the story delves into the heart of this battle for truth and justice. The movement for justice had become a force of unprecedented power. Yet even as the rallies grew and laws began to change, the darker forces underpinning the network of hate still loomed large. Investigations into Robert Dean's extremist ties continued to yield alarming discoveries, painting a chilling picture of how deeply ingrained these ideologies had become. What initially seemed like a localized problem now revealed itself as part of a sprawling, global web of hatred and manipulation, fed by disinformation and shielded by powerful allies. As law enforcement delved deeper, they uncovered connections to international groups that funded and coordinated efforts to sow division in societies worldwide. These organizations, cloaked in the guise of advocacy or free speech movements, operated with chilling efficiency. They utilized social media algorithms to radicalize individuals, spreading propaganda designed to exploit fears and insecurities. Bank records and encrypted communications revealed substantial donations flowing into these groups from shadowy benefactors, some of whom held positions of significant influence. For Elijah Carter, these revelations were both sobering and galvanizing. The battle he had believed to be against individual acts of hatred was now clearly a struggle against systemic forces that thrived on division. Yet Elijah refused to be intimidated. Exposing the truth is the first step toward dismantling it, he told his growing network of allies. We can't allow these shadows to grow unchecked. They only win if we let them. The exposure of these networks sent shockwaves through the public consciousness. News outlets dedicated hours of coverage to the findings, detailing how sophisticated these operations had become. Analysts discussed how coordinated efforts targeted disenfranchised communities, turning grievances into hatred and isolation into violence. Public outrage swelled, and the demand for accountability reached a fever pitch. Amidst this uproar, Elijah was invited to participate in a congressional hearing aimed at addressing the systemic failures that had allowed these groups to flourish. The hearing was a pivotal moment, not just for the movement, but for Elijah himself. As he prepared to testify, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He thought of the lives lost to senseless violence, the communities torn apart by bigotry, and the countless individuals who had reached out to him, sharing their stories of pain and resilience. The hearing room was packed, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Elijah sat at the witness table, his calm demeanor masking the intensity of the moment. Cameras captured every movement, every word, as he began his testimony. "The issue we face today is not just one of individual prejudice," he said, his voice steady but impassioned. "It is a systemic failure that has allowed hatred to evolve into a well-organized, well-funded machine. If we want to address this problem, we must confront it at its roots." Elijah's testimony was powerful, weaving together personal experiences with the hard truths uncovered by investigators. He spoke of the threats he had faced, the lives that had been endangered, and the urgency of taking action. His words resonated deeply, drawing nods from lawmakers and sparking applause from the audience. "This isn't about politics," he concluded. "It's about humanity. It's about the kind of world we want to leave for the next generation." The hearing marked a turning point in the fight against extremism. Lawmakers introduced sweeping reforms aimed at increasing transparency in political donations, regulating social media platforms to combat disinformation, and enhancing education programs to promote critical thinking and empathy. While these measures faced opposition from some quarters, the public's overwhelming support created a sense of inevitability. Yet the revelations didn't end there. Investigators continued to uncover alarming details, including evidence of collusion between certain officials and the extremist networks. These revelations further eroded public trust in institutions, highlighting the need for systemic change. Elijah, understanding the gravity of the moment, doubled down on his efforts to mobilize communities. "The system can only change if we demand it," he said during a televised town hall. "Each of us has a role to play in holding those in power accountable." Despite the progress, the challenges Elijah faced grew more daunting. The extremists, now cornered, became increasingly desperate. Coordinated efforts to discredit him intensified, with doctored videos and false accusations flooding social media. The vitriol reached a fever pitch, and Elijah's every move was scrutinized by those eager to see him fall. Through it all, Elijah remained unshaken. He surrounded himself with a close-knit team of advisors and friends who provided unwavering support. Among them was Sarah, a community organizer who had become one of his most trusted allies. Sarah's own experiences with prejudice had fueled her passion for justice, and her strategic mind was instrumental in countering the attacks against Elijah. Together, they devised campaigns to debunk misinformation and highlight the movement's achievements. One of their most impactful strategies involved amplifying the voices of those who had been transformed by the movement. Videos of individuals sharing their stories of overcoming hatred, finding common ground, and embracing empathy spread across social media, countering the negativity with messages of hope. Elijah himself participated in many of these efforts, sitting down for candid conversations that showcased his humanity and unyielding resolve. In one particularly moving interview, Elijah spoke about the toll the journey had taken on him personally. "There are days when the weight feels unbearable," he admitted, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "But then I think about the people we're fighting for, the families who just want to live in peace, the children who deserve a future free from hate. That's what keeps me going." The impact of these efforts was undeniable. Public support for the movement continued to grow, and the extremists found themselves increasingly isolated. Even some former allies of the network began to distance themselves, recognizing the inevitability of change. For Elijah, these small victories were a testament to the power of perseverance and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The movement had achieved remarkable progress, but the fight was far from over. As Elijah and his allies celebrated their victories, a chilling new revelation emerged, one that threatened to unravel everything they had worked for. How would Elijah confront this new challenge, and what sacrifices would be necessary to see justice prevail? Stay with us as the story takes an unexpected and harrowing turn. As the investigation deepened, a new and unexpected revelation threatened to shatter the fragile momentum Elijah and his movement had painstakingly built. A series of leaked documents surfaced, detailing a secret strategy by the extremist network to infiltrate key institutions and sow discord from within. These weren't just nameless faces hidden behind screens. They were teachers, business executives, and even law enforcement officers who had covertly aligned themselves with the network's ideology. The scale of the infiltration was staggering, and it shook the public's faith in the very systems meant to protect them. Elijah Carter was no stranger to adversity, but this revelation felt like an entirely new battle. The network's reach, now laid bare, was far greater than anyone had anticipated. It wasn't just about exposing individual wrongdoers. It was about confronting an entire system that had allowed these ideologies to fester and thrive. Yet Elijah knew this moment demanded clarity and conviction. He stood before a nation eager for guidance, his voice as steady as ever. "We cannot let the shadows dictate our future," he said during a primetime address. "This is not a time for despair. It's a time for action, for accountability, and for courage." The public's response was immediate and powerful. The revelation ignited a new wave of activism, with citizens demanding greater transparency and accountability from their institutions. Whistleblower hotlines flooded with tips, many of which led to the identification of individuals complicit in the extremist network. Local governments launched sweeping investigations into corruption and bias within their ranks, while school boards and corporate offices began reassessing their policies to root out prejudice. Elijah, ever the steady leader, played a pivotal role in guiding these efforts. He convened town halls across the country, creating spaces for honest and sometimes painful conversations about bias and accountability. These gatherings were raw and emotional, but they were also transformative. For many attendees, it was their first opportunity to confront the ways in which systemic prejudice had shaped their lives and communities. "The truth can be uncomfortable," Elijah told one crowd, "but it's also liberating. Only by facing it head-on can we begin to build something better." One of the most impactful moments came during a town hall in a small southern town where tensions ran high. A former police officer who had been exposed as a member of the extremist network chose to publicly apologize for his actions. Standing before a packed auditorium, his voice trembling with emotion, he said, "I let fear and anger cloud my judgment, but seeing the strength and grace of this movement has shown me another way. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused, and I want to be part of the solution." The moment was met with mixed reactions. Some clapped hesitantly, while others remained silent. But Elijah, standing nearby, stepped forward to address the crowd. "Accountability is the first step," he said, his tone firm yet compassionate. "And it takes courage to admit when you've been wrong. Let's ensure this moment leads to real change, not just words." His response diffused the tension, and by the end of the evening, many attendees approached the former officer, offering their forgiveness and support. The movement's growing influence wasn't limited to these local efforts. On the national stage, Elijah continued to push for legislative reform, working closely with a coalition of lawmakers to introduce sweeping anti-hate crime measures. The proposed legislation, dubbed the Unity Act, aimed to address the root causes of extremism by funding education initiatives, strengthening protections for marginalized communities, and increasing penalties for those who incited violence. The Unity Act faced fierce opposition from some quarters, with detractors claiming it infringed on free speech or overstepped governmental authority. But Elijah, armed with the truth and a relentless determination, countered these arguments with grace and logic. During a televised debate, he faced a prominent critic who argued that the act was unnecessary. Unnecessary? Elijah repeated, his voice calm but commanding. Tell that to the families who've lost loved ones to hate-fueled violence. Tell that to the communities living in fear because we've allowed prejudice to grow unchecked. This isn't about politics, it's about humanity. His words struck a chord, and public support for the Unity Act surged. Petitions garnered millions of signatures, and marches in support of the bill drew record-breaking crowds. The pressure became too great to ignore, and after weeks of intense debate, the Unity Act passed with bipartisan support. Its passage marked a significant victory for the movement and a personal triumph for Elijah, who had fought tirelessly to see it through. But the real impact of the act would take time to manifest. Elijah knew that laws alone couldn't change hearts and minds. That work would require sustained effort, empathy, and a willingness to engage in difficult conversations. And so, he continued his grassroots efforts, meeting with community leaders, mentoring young activists, and reminding everyone he encountered that change was a collective endeavor. One of the most inspiring outcomes of the movement was the creation of the Resilience Center, a community hub named in honor of Elijah's unwavering strength. The center offered resources for victims of hate crimes, workshops on conflict resolution, and programs aimed at fostering understanding among diverse groups. Elijah often visited the center, speaking with visitors and participating in its initiatives. In one particularly poignant moment, Elijah met a young boy named Jordan, who had been bullied at school for his mixed-race heritage. Jordan's mother tearfully explained how Elijah's story had given her son the courage to stand up for himself. Elijah knelt to meet Jordan's gaze, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're stronger than you know," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "And no matter what anyone says, you have the power to make this world a better place." The moment encapsulated everything Elijah stood for: hope, resilience, and the belief in the inherent goodness of people. It was a reminder that even in the face of darkness, the light of compassion could prevail. As the movement celebrated its victories, a startling development emerged, a revelation about the next phase of the extremist network's plans, one that could threaten the very foundation of the progress achieved. How would Elijah and his allies respond to this new challenge? And what would it cost them to protect the future they had fought so hard to create? Stay tuned as the story reaches its most critical and harrowing chapter. The movement had achieved more than anyone could have imagined. Laws were changing, communities were healing, and the name Elijah Carter had become synonymous with resilience and unity. Yet, as Elijah and his allies savored these hard-won victories, the latest revelation reminded them that the battle was far from over. The remnants of the extremist network, though fragmented, had not been eradicated. They had shifted their strategy, targeting the movement itself through misinformation campaigns and covert attempts to undermine its foundations. These tactics were insidious, designed to erode trust and sow doubt. Fake social media profiles spread conspiracy theories, alleging that the movement was a front for hidden agendas. Community initiatives were sabotaged by anonymous threats, and several key figures within the movement found themselves targeted by baseless accusations intended to discredit their work. Elijah, as the face of the movement, bore the brunt of these attacks. His every word and action were scrutinized, twisted, and weaponized by those determined to halt progress. Through it all, Elijah remained unshaken. He understood that these tactics were born of desperation, a last-ditch effort by those who feared the transformative power of the movement. "When the shadows fight back, it's because the light is too bright for them to bear," he told his team during one of their strategy meetings. "We just have to keep shining." In response, the movement adapted. A task force of tech-savvy activists was assembled to counteract misinformation, using fact-checking and transparency to dismantle false narratives. Grassroots organizers redoubled their efforts, focusing on deepening connections within their communities and building trust. And Elijah, ever the leader, leaned into the power of storytelling. He began working on a memoir, a deeply personal account of his journey from the Capitol grounds to the heart of a global movement. The process was both cathartic and challenging, forcing Elijah to revisit moments of pain and triumph in equal measure. He wrote about the humiliation he had endured, the threats he had faced, and the sacrifices he had made. But he also wrote about the hope he had witnessed, the countless acts of kindness, the resilience of those who stood beside him, and the transformative power of unity. The memoir, titled Unyielding, A Journey of Grace and Justice, was published to widespread acclaim. Readers around the world were captivated by Elijah's raw honesty and profound insights. The book became an instant bestseller, sparking book club discussions, academic seminars, and countless letters from readers who felt seen and inspired by Elijah's words. "Your story reminded me that I'm not alone," one letter read. "It gave me the courage to stand up for what I believe in." The memoir also served a strategic purpose. By sharing his story in his own words, Elijah reclaimed the narrative from those who sought to distort it. He used the platform to highlight the movement's achievements and reinforce its core message, that change was possible when people came together with compassion and courage. But the memoir was just one part of Elijah's legacy. The Resilience Center, now a network of facilities across the country, had become a beacon of hope for marginalized communities. Its programs were transforming lives, offering resources and support to those who needed it most. Scholarships were established in Elijah's name, providing opportunities for young leaders to pursue their dreams while promoting the values of justice and inclusion. One of the scholarship recipients, a young woman named Sophia, embodied the spirit of the movement. Growing up in a community plagued by division, Sophia had faced her share of challenges. But through the scholarship program, she found her voice as an advocate for change. Her speeches at local events, inspired by Elijah's example, were stirring and eloquent, drawing applause and sparking meaningful conversations. When Sophia met Elijah at a Resilience Center event, she tearfully thanked him for paving the way. "You've shown me what's possible," she said. "I want to carry that forward." Elijah, deeply moved, responded with characteristic humility. "You're the future," he told her, "and the future is brighter because of people like you." As the years passed, the impact of Elijah's work continued to ripple outward. The movement inspired similar efforts in other countries, as activists around the world adopted its principles of empathy, accountability, and unity. The lessons learned from the fight against extremism were shared at international forums, shaping policies and initiatives aimed at fostering inclusion on a global scale. Elijah himself transitioned into a new role, focusing on mentorship and advocacy, while stepping back from the day-to-day operations of the movement. He spent more time with his family, cherishing the moments of peace that had often eluded him during the height of the struggle. Yet, even in quieter times, his commitment to justice remained unwavering. One evening, as Elijah walked through a park near his home, he was approached by a stranger. The man, a father holding the hand of his young daughter, hesitated before speaking. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Because of you, my daughter will grow up in a better world." Elijah smiled, his heart full. "That's all I ever wanted," he replied. While Elijah's legacy seemed secure, the movement's next challenge loomed on the horizon, a fight to ensure the systems, built in the wake of victory, could endure the tests of time and resist those who sought to undo the progress made. How would Elijah's principles guide this next generation of leaders? And what lessons would they carry forward as they wrote the next chapter of the fight for justice? Stay tuned as the story explores the enduring impact of a life dedicated to unity and hope. Years had passed since the first ripple of change began with Elijah Carter's quiet strength on the Capitol grounds. His story had become a touchstone for those seeking inspiration, a testament to the power of courage and compassion in the face of hatred. Yet, Elijah's greatest legacy wasn't written in the headlines or immortalized in his best-selling memoir. It was alive in the actions of those he had inspired. Across the nation and even the world, his influence continued to shape the lives of individuals and communities. One of the most enduring symbols of Elijah's impact was the Carter Foundation for Justice and Equality. Established with the proceeds from his memoir and donations from supporters, the foundation had become a force for change. Its primary mission was to address systemic inequities and empower the next generation of leaders. Through scholarships, mentorship programs, and community initiatives, the foundation provided opportunities to those who had been marginalized, ensuring that Elijah's vision of a more inclusive world lived on. The Carter Foundation Scholarship Program, in particular, had transformed lives. Each year, dozens of students from underserved communities received the support they needed to pursue higher education. The recipients were chosen not only for their academic achievements, but also for their commitment to social justice. Among them was a young man named Malik, who had grown up in a neighborhood scarred by violence and poverty. Malik had always dreamed of becoming a lawyer, inspired by stories of those who fought for justice. The scholarship allowed him to attend law school, and upon graduating, he returned to his community to provide legal aid to those who couldn't afford it. At a foundation event where he met Elijah, Malik expressed his gratitude. "You gave me the chance to make a difference," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Elijah's response was simple yet profound. "You're proof that the difference was already inside you." The ripple effect extended beyond education. The Resilience Centers, now a network of over 50 facilities, had become havens for healing and growth. Each center offered resources tailored to the needs of its community, from conflict resolution workshops to cultural festivals celebrating diversity. The centers also served as hubs for dialogue, bringing together people from different backgrounds to build bridges of understanding. In one such center, located in a small town once divided by racial tensions, a powerful story unfolded. A local farmer named Henry, who had once harbored prejudice, began attending the center's dialogue sessions out of curiosity. There, he met Maria, an immigrant who had faced hostility since moving to the town. Through their conversations, Henry's perspective began to shift. Over time, the two developed a friendship that defied the odds, and Henry became an outspoken advocate for inclusion in his community. When he later shared his story at a Carter Foundation event, he credited Elijah's example for giving him the courage to change. Elijah, now in his late 60s, watched these transformations with quiet pride. Though he had stepped back from public life, his involvement with the foundation kept him connected to the work that had defined his journey. He often attended events and met with scholarship recipients, his wisdom and humility leaving a lasting impression on everyone he encountered. Internationally, Elijah's influence continued to grow. The principles he championed, grace under pressure, empathy in the face of hatred, and unity in diversity, resonated across cultures. Activists in countries grappling with their own struggles against prejudice cited his story as a source of strength. In South America, a grassroots organization working to combat economic inequality adopted his slogan, "Shine the light of truth," as their guiding mantra. In Europe, an annual human rights conference was renamed the Elijah Carter Forum, drawing leaders and thinkers from around the world to discuss solutions for a more just society. Despite these successes, Elijah remained acutely aware of the challenges that persisted. Extremist ideologies still lingered, adapting to new technologies and exploiting divisions in society. Elijah often spoke of the importance of vigilance and the need for continuous effort. "The work is never finished," he reminded his audience at a rare public appearance. "Each generation must choose to carry the torch of justice forward. It's not about achieving perfection. It's about striving for progress, one step at a time." His words resonated deeply with Sophia, a young activist who had emerged as one of the movement's rising stars. A former scholarship recipient, Sophia had dedicated her life to advancing the cause of justice. She often sought Elijah's counsel, cherishing the opportunity to learn from his experiences. "You've built a foundation for us," she told him during one of their conversations. "We'll make sure it stands strong." Elijah smiled, his eyes filled with a quiet certainty. "It's not just about standing strong," he replied. "It's about growing stronger together." In the years that followed, Sophia and others like her continued to build on Elijah's legacy, forging new paths and confronting new challenges. They expanded the foundation's reach, launched global initiatives, and fostered partnerships with organizations dedicated to creating a fairer world. Through their efforts, Elijah's message endured, a beacon of hope for generations to come. One of the most profound moments of Elijah's later years came during the dedication of the Carter Peace Park, a sprawling public space designed to honor the values he had championed. The park featured gardens representing different cultures, a memorial for victims of hate crimes, and an amphitheater where visitors could share their stories. At the park center stood a statue of Elijah, his figure depicted not as a solitary hero, but as part of a circle of diverse individuals, symbolizing the collective strength of the movement. During the dedication ceremony, Elijah was invited to speak, standing before a crowd that included friends, family, and countless supporters. He reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "This park isn't just a tribute to what we've accomplished," he said. "It's a reminder of what we can achieve when we choose love over fear, understanding over division, and hope over despair. Let it inspire us to keep moving forward together." As the crowd erupted in applause, Elijah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that the work would continue, carried forward by the countless individuals whose lives had been touched by the movement. The ripples he had set in motion so many years ago had grown into waves, and their impact would be felt for generations. While Elijah's personal journey had reached its conclusion, the movement he inspired would continue to evolve, shaped by new leaders and new challenges. How would future generations rise to meet the call for justice? And what new stories would emerge as they carried Elijah's legacy forward? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: the light of truth and unity would never be extinguished. Elijah Carter's story teaches us that courage, compassion, and unity are the most powerful tools we have to confront the darkness in the world. It shows us that one person's actions, rooted in dignity and love, can inspire countless others to create change that echoes across generations. As we reflect on Elijah's legacy, let's remember that the fight for justice is ongoing, and that each of us has a role to play in carrying his light forward. Now, if Elijah's journey inspired you, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one. Let's build a community dedicated to hope, resilience, and the pursuit of a better world. And don't stop there. Leave a comment below with an uplifting message to keep this energy alive. Something like, "I choose to carry the light of truth and unity forward." Also, don't forget to check out our other videos for more powerful stories that inspire and empower. Together, we can shine a light that outlasts any shadow.